La 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 la. Everybody wants to be a crusader. Nobody wants to be audited by the Inquisition. The modern state of Christendom. Gilliman, the Ultramarines Primarch of 40k. Kind of a self-insert for the fans that love the series more than anybody else. Loyal to a fault, Boy Scout who's religious, but more so a student of history, tactics, and pragmatic strategy, who ends up dating a really hot chick despite all his workout buddies being too alpha Chad to like women at all. I always found that quite funny. I think the issue with Indians glomming on to all the world's cultures isn't due to their schizotypal religion alone, or a government expedite program by itself, but because India sucks so badly that anything and everything is better than that. However, you notice that they never want to lay in the road and sniff petrol like abos. Really makes you think. There is a major problem with the First World, though. We have many inverted concepts, but one of them that's been escalating recently is how we venerate laughing at others and laughing with ourselves. Let's think about that for a second. It's actually venerable to laugh at ourselves and laugh with others. That's the actual virtue here. Inverted, it's become a vice, and we all indulge it, regardless of our inclinations towards morality. It's a habit. It's a plague of a habit, and it infects people through other people. It seems like this recent OBS update has fixed a lot of the audio issues I and seemingly other people were having, which is good. All right, no more eating on stream. Sorry I haven't streamed too much recently. It's just so hot. It's so hot. You know, this is the time where everybody takes a vacation. This is a nice time to take a vacation now. I'm trying very hard to build up good notes and make thumbnails and expand my Twitter presence. So, excuse me, to both help and be helped to enter into a partnership with Judas Chu, who you may have seen the interview. It was very fun. And I think the fact that we have differing opinions on a lot of different things and different personalities, but still have the ability to get along because we're both personable people whose egos aren't incredibly large because we both effectively been at death's door. I think that is very important, and I think that he would make a very good co-equal partner in streaming. But that's only if he wants to, you know. I'm perfectly fine if he doesn't. I think it would help him, and I think it would help me. And I think that though he is younger than me, he's incredibly intelligent, and that I could help with some of the more administrative issues, and that he could just bring the energy, bring some facts, bring his knowledge, and that we could make something cool for a period of time. You know, everything has its end, and I hope that the end to our dealings isn't when my dad comes on, which he will in a little over a week, to be interviewed by him. Because it's perfectly reasonable if he gives me one interview, I give him one interview, and then he interviews my dad, and then just cuts it off after that. That's reasonable. I understand that. But I also have the premonition that we could do good things together. So that's what I'm hoping ends up happening. So, Cory Booker, guy who's been getting raked over the coals recently, and rightfully so, desperately wants to be the next Obama. But it seems that he's about 20 IQ points lower, and standing for 28 hours straight won't cut it. It doesn't matter how much H3H3 is a good example of this. It does not matter how much Adderall you do. Thinking a little bit faster does not make you better. In fact, you are now dumber faster, which is one of the reasons why people think that AI is going to help them so much, is because that helps them eliminate the dumbness and outsource it, not eliminate it, outsource the dumbness and make it even faster than their Adderall-addled brains. So, yeah. But back to Cory Booker. He legitimately is significantly dumber than Obama. Obama was a serious operator. And if you've gone back and read his memoirs from college, he actually, I believe, first started hating white women or white people and white society when he was rejected by white women in college that he wanted to date. And whether it was or whether it wasn't, he attributed that to racism. And so with his hate crime stuff, which actually hate crime laws were started under Bush, don't get it twisted. They might have even been started under Clinton, but I actually think they were started in like 2004 as a way of kind of like counterbalancing the mass destruction of Iraq with some form of like overprotective, tyrannical father stuff that says, oh, I'm helping you. I'm helping you. Obama really doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down on the hate speech laws, specifically because he genuinely does think that white people are racist as a baseline, as a cultural thing, which they're not. If you're Christian, racism should be one of the last things in your mind. You're focused on religions and you're focused on converting cultures without destroying them. You know, you have to shave off certain things like child sacrifice in the Aztecs. You have to eliminate that, but you don't actually have to eliminate the entire culture or the language proper. I mean, just look at the Philippines. It has a tremendous amount of synthesis because the Tagalog people in the Philippines weren't doing a whole lot of things wrong. And so they just think of the Celtic people of the British Isles. Mostly, vast majority, pretty much every time after St. Patrick, peaceful conversion. And thanks to St. Patrick being so intelligent to synthesize the culture that he unfortunately was sold into slavery towards, in a Dublin slave port. And he learned the culture from the inside out. And just like a lot of ancient slave cultures, like the Jewish culture, you could actually rise up the ranks through your talent, because they wouldn't just automatically assume that you're a write-off and worthless because you're a slave. That's a lot of ancient slaving cultures, actually. It's slave trading in the Arab Empire, in the Babylonian Talmudic empires, in the Babylonian Talmudic British Empire, in the Jerusalemite Talmudic Portuguese Empire, or thalassocracy, excuse me, thalassocracy, that's a word. That's where you get the slave trading that just views, and Dahomey, which is a fetishist, ancient, just pretty much evil culture, the Dahomean culture. I think Lori Lightfoot actually comes from Benin. She looks like a Benini person. But anyways, I'm getting off track. Those are all evil forms of slavery. It's very likely that a more ancient, sort of like a Western Native American culture of slave owning had more capabilities of a slave rising up the rank, just like the ancient Jewish people who would invite anybody into their culture if they were willing, like slave or otherwise, if they were willing to learn the Torah and uphold its virtues and uphold its values, which is in one way a survival mechanism, but in another way, it's actually incredibly venerable. And of course, people venerate ancient Israel. Ancient Israel was blessed by God. There was demoniac possession in Solomon, and that's exactly where you get the roots to hell and branches to heaven, alchemical, Gnostic expansion of thought inside of the later Phoenicians, but maintained through the lineage of David and the culture of David and the ancient Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, through the tribe of Judah, of which came Jesus, entering all humanity into that particular covenant. It's not some crazy thing. It's legitimately how these things work. And what's crazy is the modern state of Israel, where they teach young children, young Zionists, from a young age, just like transgenderism, just like the gifted and talented program that I was part of, but I never had friends, so it never got to my head. that they're special and they're better than people from a very, very young age. The Goyim and how to treat them in the Talmud as animals. That is corrupting. That is extremely corrupting. That hurts your sense of self worth because your sense of self worth is already peaked by doing nothing. So, how could doing anything of value and worth ever get beyond the maximum of who you already are? It's already maxed out. And it hurts and grows a malicious form of your base ego, which itself is constructed there to protect you from reality. But in in that stage, in that Max Stirner mold, you become an absolute monster. And that's the thing with the transgenderism stuff. Children are taught from a young age that it's special to be transgender, or 20 years ago that it's special to be homosexual. And so they slot into it because they want to be special. And you have that sort of a root in Babylonian Talmudism. There's a root in that. There's a root in a lot of leftist issues in Babylonian Talmudism. And you see it a lot playing out in the state of Israel. And unfortunately, what it seems like is that all those people will be a burnt offering at the end of the day for the ultra elite that will run out the back door with the money. And this is probably played out time and time again, from the 109 nations to the pogroms to the Holocaust, to what's going to happen to Israel in the next 5 years. This is going to play out over and over again until parents stop raising their kids like that for whatever reason. Parents raise their kids like that, likely because they were raised like that. And that's why you have literal terrorists founding the state of Israel, then it pretending for a while to be something extremely balanced and something extremely secular and something extremely venerable and moral. In fact, the most moral, as they would call themselves, which is a laugh. It's always a laugh whenever you have anybody calling themselves the best at something, because that's not something your lips should say. If you're actually the best at something, it should always be that you're the worst of something. The greatest saints always consider themselves the biggest sinners, and that's not just a Christian thing. You practice something over and over and over again, you find out all the flaws and all the ways that you can improve things. If you never practice, if you never get better, you can assume that you're the best in your closed little bubble of never going outside and seeing better people. You can absorb that. So let's get beyond that. And let's pray for the people of Israel and their souls, because what's happening to the bodies of the Palestinians is not as bad as what's happening to the souls of the Israelis. And that's why like 70% of the IDF is out of commission, because a lot of them have PTSD. Their souls are screaming inside of their heads. They look in the mirrors, they see a monster. They look at their children, they see the children that they've killed. And it's a serious problem. Pray for the souls of the Israelis because they need it. And that's a good Christian thing to do, to not get upset, but instead reserve judgment for yourself and pray for others. I think it is important that nobody lets themselves sink to the ultra-Zionists' level of wishing total destruction and genocide on people you consider your enemies. If that sickness is normalized in the public zeitgeist, the child-raping anarchist Sabbatean Frankists win. Those are the real Hollywood Babylonians. And we all know what happens in Hollywood, so don't let them win. Don't sink society into that place. Let it be a small subsection of people desperate for more hands that constantly shed new recruits as these people, sold a false pretense, find out what these people are actually about. Never let society sink to the point where that's just normalized, ever. At this rate, the ultra-Zionists will lose. They'll lose the war after winning a few battles, and after sinking everything into this tiny project for only $500 billion worth of gas and a canal called the Ben-Gurion Canal, nobody will really want to use. And where's it going to go? Italy? You know, that's the thing. It's like modern Italy, Turkey, Ukraine, they could genuinely be the people that destroy the world or help the world. And when it comes to Ukraine, that's not a choice of the Ukrainian people. That's ultimately up to either the Ukrainian people to somehow rise up against Zelensky, which they already try to, but they're so disorganized and disorientated from all this and propagandized that it's hard. So that help might actually come down from the north. And the Grecian people who try their hardest and have for a long time, who actually have pretty much the strongest anti-Zionist sentiment because they learned under the Ottoman Empire who the real court viziers actually are. Turkey, which is completely and utterly evil, but seeing what's happening to Palestine, Syria, probably Egypt in the future, Iran, hopefully the zeitgeist of Turkey changes away from that, thinking that supporting Israel is being a Western country and that the people love them. They don't. The Europeans don't love them. They'll never love them. If they were to give back Constantinople, which they just recently turned the Hagia Sophia into a mosque, so they're not going to do that, then people might love them. But Italy, that's the hardest one, man. That is the hardest one. That's the hardest one, man. You can only expect like Nepalese and Sicilian pirates, like seizing cargo going to Milan and Florence and Venice. That's the best thing that you can help. And Slovenia, which is mostly Venetian, actually is hugely anti-Israel sentiment. So other than North Italy, you could legitimately see a blocking of the Ben-Gurion Canal, especially through Sevilla. They will legitimately like shut down the Gibraltar pass there, and then they'll have nowhere else to go. Where are you going to go? Lyons, the Bay of Lyons in France? Maybe the Freemason French with their like 15-year-old age of consent or whatever, maybe that can be the only port that welcomes Ben-Gurion traffic. But they already have the Suez Canal. It's a strange thing. It's a very, very strange thing. But there is $500 billion worth of gas. But who's going to buy it? They can use it for a period of time, but having all that gas is only going to take them so far. When you're raised a Zionist, when you're raised an egotist, you seem to think that the world ends at your ego. You forget that the world is a very, very big place, and that will sink any sort of long-term, wide-scale ambitions that you have, despite the fact that the Mossad is directly descended from some real power players. People like Henry Kissinger who could really get around. You don't really see that these days. And that's why it's all out in the open in front of us, because it's meant to demoralize us and make us angry and to change the zeitgeist of humanity to where, people go, well, everybody does it, right? Can't let that happen. That is a further erosion of the Christian nation, which is exactly what the Sabbatean Frankists want. It's incredibly important to point out the legal prostitution popularized by police-protected pimps and the very mechanism and pornographers. It's the strongest mechanism by which sex sells, and one's soul is afforded to strangers through the very mechanism by which we bind together and lovingly raise a family. Ergo, Sydney Sweeney may have good genes, but Generation X collectively coming together to espouse the brilliance of a modern pinup model is no different than how it's been for 60, 70, 80 years. That they and their most emotionally mutilated devouring fathers have consumed sex as a commodity through movies, advertisements, video games, pornography, and even fashion trends. And that's exactly why it's so big right now. This conversation about her. Which she's just being used, Most people will come to get sick of hearing about it and get sick of her. But the conversation and the point is what is being hammered home. Most Americans in the 40s did not want to drop the nukes on Japan. MacArthur, Herbert Hoover, Oppenheimer, LeMay, even Truman to a lesser extent, despite his intense hatred towards the races of East Asia. But the military top brass, the generals in New Mexico, these archons of destruction and pain, they were chomping at the bit. You could blame the socialist cousin lover FDR, but his brain was gone by the time he decided he would be president for 3 or even 4 terms. Similar in his 3rd term to Joe Biden or the latter years of Ronald Reagan. All puppets ripe for manipulation. Truman himself was one of the least intelligent people to ever sit as a president of these United States. Probably top 3. Least intelligent. The real evil, though, is found in Virginia and Wyoming, not in San Francisco or the Bronx, actually. Even the evil of Los Angeles and Miami pales in comparison to what the Pentagon has been built with, the mass human sacrifice to dark and ancient archdemons. What our older ancestors would call gods. That's the culprit, actually. Believe it or not. Here's a quote. Just when the Japanese were ready to capitulate, we went ahead and introduced to the world the most devastating weapon it had ever seen and, in effect, gave the go-ahead to Russia to swarm over East Asia. Washington decided it was time to use the A-bomb. I submit that it was the wrong decision. It was wrong on strategic grounds, and it was wrong on humanitarian grounds. Elias Zacharias, Deputy Director of the Office of Naval Intelligence. And today, our morals have degraded so far that large portions of our country have been brainwashed from a young age to support it as some grand victory of showmanship, when people back then accepted it was just terrorism. There is so much evil in this world that if you were to stare at it for just a second, you would go mad while being blinded by tears. And while I'm on that note, if you became a Zionist in the last 2 years, only after seeing the mass killing, you are scum. You are scum. That doesn't mean you're unsavable, but you are effectively scum. The lowest of the low. And I genuinely don't believe there's a single shred of difference from the people who started throwing Romans in the last year while knowing nothing at all about German history around the turn of the 20th century, and these recent Zionist converts. These are all people that have activated due to their inherent lack of moral framework and would be the very people committing the Holodomor or the Holocaust for the communists or the Nazis because they too had no inherent moral framework. That doesn't mean they're inherently bad, but that they've grown up under some of the most effective propaganda known to mankind and fully embraced the fallen nature of humanity. They call the younger generation X the lost generation, and after extensive studying of the events that took place after the Kennedy assassination, now I know why. Murder spiked in the 80s and 90s, but it's fallen since, when my generation was the same age as them. Why is that? And why, for that matter, does the same group of people assume to be worthy of enacting the most judgment of both their parents and their children, when they themselves are actively dragging our country into annihilation, with ones on the top liquidating everything built upon generation after generation after generation, and the ones on the bottom indulging in the most vice of any human I've ever seen, Sodom and Gomorrah. And they're raising gooner, gambler, drug-addicted, neglected children. But there's a plus side to a subsection of the sector simping for Ethan Klein. In between the main story of some people will gunt guard a deranged communist freak when it seems popular, there's a side story of showing people like me why postmodern fashion is clutched onto because it distracts from the ugly inbred features of a pharmaceutical-addicted, twitching communist constantly by flooding the senses with disgust before they even speak their ugly nasally words from their infantile, warped, self-serving minds, corrupting the air around them. And mind you, Ethan did used to be funny. But after he went on Ozempic and got all skin floppy, looking like a typhoid patient and went full neocon, he's just a miserable shack of Sid. And now the alt-right simps for him. Funny stuff. Funny stuff. It just makes you think. It makes you think about changes in your own backyard, about the bigger picture. Why should a swarm of locusts gain clemency from God? How could frogs like Ethan and rivers of blood from Gaza, of Pharaoh's hardened heart and dying children, give glory to God? Well, it's all part of the greater plan. God works on the macro scale. We say it's mysterious, but when we zoom out, we see those who are receptive to God's plan suffering in silence so that they might conserve their actions in service to his plan. that from tragedy there might be a greater good wrought in the hearts of the faithful, a zeal of constitution, a sharpened focus, that the strength gained by the good after the toll of the devil is wrung from God's earth might abate greater tragedy in ourselves and in others. I had an idea for an evil cashew farm. I call it TND Cashew Company. Every cashew has 1488 printed on it. All batches are certified kosher by one of those rabbis who still practices Metzitza B'Pah despite having herpes. 10% of the profits go towards buying battered women's shelters and converting them to vape shops. I already have a $10 billion startup investment from Peter Thiel, and Javier Milei has pledged farmland to the project. All right, y'all. With that, I'm going to leave you off. Hope you have a good one. Just keep staying cool out there. Keep staying hydrated out there. Cheers.